The avoidant spends most of their relational life in passive position. They respond rather than initiate, follow rather than lead, wait for others to make moves, and take risks. This passivity is protective strategy. If they are not leading, they cannot be blamed for outcomes or accused of wanting too much. But there are specific conditions that finally make even the most offended avoidant step up and take the lead. Understanding these conditions reveals what it takes to activate the avoidant's dormant capacity for pursuit and investment. These are not manipulation tactics, but authentic circumstances that create the combination of safety and motivation the avoidant needs to override their fear. When they realize you are actually leaving, and it is not a test. The first condition is recognition that you are actually leaving, not as a test or manipulation, but as genuine decision to walk away from relationship that is not serving you. The avoidant is accustomed to threats that are not enforced and boundaries that collapse under pressure. They have experienced people who say they are leaving but always stay, who threaten consequences they never follow through on, who communicate needs they ultimately abandon when the avoidant does not meet them. But when you are genuinely done, when your decision is final, and you are moving forward, regardless of what they do, something shifts. Initially, the avoidant may let you go without fight, may even feel relief that the pressure of the relationship is ending. They tell themselves they are better off alone anyway, that the relationship was too demanding, that your departure proves they were right to keep their distance. But as time passes, and the reality of your absence settles in, as they start to process what they lost, many avoidants reach a point where the pain of losing you becomes greater than the fear of stepping up. This is when they finally take the lead, reaching out with genuine effort, making concrete plans to see you, communicating clearly about wanting to try again, demonstrating through action rather than just words that they are willing to show up differently. The crucial element is that your leaving must be real. If you leave a strategy to make them chase, if you create distance to manipulate them into stepping up, they will sense the inauthenticity, and it will not create the same effect. But when you leave, because you genuinely value yourself too much to accept what they are offering, when your departure is about your own well-being rather than controlling their behavior, the avoidant recognizes this is different. Your genuine departure forces them to confront that their passivity has real consequences, that waiting for you to do all the work means losing you, that they cannot have connection with you without actively choosing it and showing up for it. This recognition can be the catalyst that finally moves them from passive position to active pursuit. However, not all avoidants will step up even when you genuinely leave. Some will let you go and never come back. Some will come back, but without having done the growth work that would make stepping up sustainable. Your leaving is not guaranteed to create their transformation. It is simply one condition that sometimes activates their capacity to lead. Whether they use that activation to actually do the work of becoming capable of relationship is entirely up to them. When they encounter someone who will not do their emotional labor for them. The second condition is encountering someone who refuses to do all the emotional labor in the relationship. The avoidant is accustomed to people who compensate for their emotional unavailability by doing double duty, initiating all conversations, planning all activities, processing all the feelings, maintaining all the connection. This allows the avoidant to remain passive while still having relationship, to benefit from intimacy without having to risk creating it themselves. But when the avoidant encounters someone who expects reciprocity in emotional labor, who stops initiating when the avoidant does not reciprocate, who maintains boundaries around doing all the work, the avoidant is forced into different position. If they want connection with this person, they must create it themselves. If they want to see this person, they must make the plans. If they want emotional intimacy, they must be willing to be vulnerable first, sometimes, rather than always responding to the other person's vulnerability. This condition works because it removes the avoidant's ability to remain passive while still having relationship. The relationship simply does not function if the avoidant does not step up. The connection fades, the communication stops, the intimacy dissolves. The avoidant must choose. Either step up and take the lead sometimes, or lose the relationship entirely. For avoidants who genuinely value the person and the connection, this choice becomes catalyst for change. The person who creates this condition is not withholding or playing games. They are simply operating from a healthy place where they recognize that relationships require mutual effort, that one person cannot sustain connection alone, that reciprocity is essential. They initiate sometimes, but not always. They create opportunities for intimacy, but also expect the avoidant to create them. They express their feelings, but also wait for the avoidant to express theirs. Many avoidants will initially pull away from someone who will not do all their emotional labor, will move on to someone who will compensate for their unavailability. But the avoidants who are capable of growth, who genuinely value the person who refuses to do all the work, will eventually recognize they need to step up. They start initiating plans, expressing feelings without being asked, taking risks to create intimacy rather than just responding to it. When the cost of not stepping up becomes greater than the fear of stepping up. The third condition is when the cost of remaining passive becomes greater than the fear that has kept them passive. This is internal calculation that happens when the avoidant fully processes what their passivity is costing them. They see that their fear of leading, of initiating, of being vulnerable first, has cost them relationship after relationship. They recognize that people they genuinely cared about walked away because the avoidant would not step up. They understand that their pattern of passivity is not protecting them. It is isolating them. This recognition often comes after significant loss. The avoidant loses someone they truly valued, someone they cannot easily replace, someone who showed them what relationship could be if they were capable of showing up for it. The loss creates enough pain that the avoidant is finally willing to examine their patterns, rather than just repeating them. They see clearly that their fear of vulnerability, their resistance to leading, their insistence on remaining passive, is the exact thing that destroyed something precious. Once this recognition occurs, the cost-benefit analysis shifts. Previously, the fear of stepping up felt more dangerous than the cost of remaining passive. But now, having experienced real loss, having felt the pain of their patterns destroying something valuable, remaining passive feels more dangerous than the vulnerability that stepping up would require. The avoidant recognizes they have more to lose by staying the same than by risking change. This shift does not happen through logic or being told they need to change. It happens through felt experience of consequences. The avoidant must feel the pain of what their passivity costs them before that pain becomes greater than their fear. External pressure, ultimatums, explanations about how their behavior affects others. None of this creates the internal shift. Only the avoidant's own direct experience of losing something they cannot afford to lose creates the motivation powerful enough to override their defended patterns. When this shift occurs, the avoidant begins to step up in ways they previously could not. They initiate difficult conversations they used to avoid. They make plans rather than waiting for others to plan. They express their feelings before being asked. They take risks to create intimacy. They lead because they finally understand that not leading means staying stuck in pattern that destroys everything they actually want. The fear is still present, but it is no longer the strongest force governing their behavior. The desire to not repeat their losses has become stronger than the fear of vulnerability. When they are with someone whose self-respect they genuinely admire. The fourth condition is being with someone whose self-respect they genuinely admire and do not want to lose. The avoidant respects strength, particularly the kind of strength that comes from self-knowledge and clear boundaries. When they encounter someone who knows their worth, who will not accept less than they deserve, who maintains their dignity even when it would be easier to compromise it, the avoidant feels something shift. This person's self-respect challenges the avoidant to rise to meet it. The avoidant recognizes they cannot keep this person through passive participation or minimal effort. This person will not stay for potential or wait indefinitely for the avoidant to be ready. This person values themselves enough to walk away from relationships that do not serve them, and the avoidant knows this is not a bluff. The genuine self-respect creates conditions where the avoidant must step up or lose someone they recognize as rare and valuable. The admiration component is crucial. The avoidant does not just recognize this person's self-respect, they admire it. They see it as strength rather than difficulty. They respect the person more, not less, for having standards and maintaining them. This admiration creates desire in the avoidant to be worthy of this person, to be someone who could meet their standards, to prove they are capable of rising to the level this person's self-respect demands. When the avoidant is with someone whose self-respect they genuinely admire, they find themselves wanting to step up in ways they have not wanted to before. They want to initiate plans because they want to see this person and know that person will not chase them. They want to communicate clearly because they recognize this person will not tolerate ambiguity. They want to be vulnerable because they understand this person requires authentic connection, not surface performance. The key is that the self-respect must be genuine rather than performed. The avoidant can sense the difference between someone who authentically values themselves and someone who is strategically acting unbothered to trigger pursuit. When they finally believe the relationship could actually work. The fifth condition is when they finally believe that relationship could actually work, that intimacy with this specific person might be sustainable rather than inevitably leading to the engulfment or abandonment they fear. The avoidance passivity is often protective mechanism based on belief that relationships do not work anyway. So why invest? Why lead? Why risk being the one who cares more when it will just end in pain regardless? But sometimes the avoidant encounters relationship that challenges this belief. The person they are with remains steady when others became chaotic. This person maintains their own life when others became consumed by the relationship. This person gives space when the avoidant needs it, without making them feel guilty about needing it. This person asks for connection, but does not demand it in suffocating ways. Over time, the avoidant begins to believe that maybe, with this person, relationship could actually be different from their fears. This belief does not form quickly. The avoidant needs sustained evidence that the relationship is safe before they can risk stepping up. They need to see through repeated experience that vulnerability does not lead to being controlled. They need to witness that closeness does not lead to losing themselves. They need to experience that this person can handle their imperfections without withdrawing or punishing. This evidence accumulates gradually, and with each piece of evidence, the avoidant's fear lessens slightly and their willingness to risk increases. When the avoidant finally believes the relationship could work, when they have enough evidence that this person and this dynamic are different from their fears, they begin to step up in ways they could not before. They take the lead in planning future together because they finally believe there might actually be future. They initiate conversations about feelings because they trust this person can handle emotional intimacy. They make themselves vulnerable because they believe this person will not use that vulnerability against them. This condition requires patience from the partner. The evidence that changes the avoidant's belief cannot be rushed, but must accumulate naturally over time through consistent behavior that demonstrates safety. When they have done enough therapeutic work to understand their patterns, the sixth condition is when they have done enough therapeutic work to understand their patterns and recognize that their passivity is choice rather than inevitability. Therapy gives the avoidant language for their experience, helps them see connections between early wounding and current behavior, provides tools for managing fear differently. The avoidant in therapy begins to recognize patterns they were previously blind to. They see that they withdraw when things get close, not because the relationship is wrong, but because closeness triggers their attachment wounds. This understanding is necessary, but not sufficient for change. Many avoidants gain insight without changing their patterns. But for some avoidants, the insight becomes catalyst for different behavior. When the avoidant has done enough therapeutic work to both understand and interrupt their patterns, they begin to step up in new ways. They initiate plans because they recognize their tendency to wait is fear-based. They express feelings because they understand that withholding them perpetuates isolation. They lead from informed place rather than fear-driven place, and this makes their leadership sustainable when they see you thriving without them and realize what they lost. The seventh condition is when they see you thriving without them and finally understand what they lost through their passivity. While you were together, the avoidant may have taken you for granted, assumed you would always be available. But seeing you flourish in their absence, happier, more confident, clearly doing well, forces them to confront what their passivity cost them. This recognition often comes months or years after separation. The avoidant sees you at an event or hears about you through mutual friends, and they see someone who has grown, who is thriving, who clearly did not need them to be okay. Seeing you thrive destroys the narrative that you needed them too much. Your thriving proves you are capable of being fine without them, which means the problem was never that you were too needy. The problem was that the avoidant would not meet you. This realization can be a powerful motivator for the avoidant to finally step up if they get another chance. They recognize they cannot take you for granted, cannot assume you will always be available. When they reach out, they do so with more intentionality than they showed before. When their pride in being independent becomes less important than connection. The eighth condition is when their pride in being independent becomes less important to them than having genuine connection. The avoidant often builds significant identity around their independence. They pride themselves on not needing others, on handling everything alone. This pride keeps them passive in relationships because taking the lead threatens this carefully constructed identity. But as avoidants age and experience enough isolation, the pride in independence can begin to feel empty. They recognize that being able to do everything alone is not strength. It is just loneliness dressed up as autonomy. They see that genuine interdependence is more valuable than the pride they have taken in not needing anyone. This shift is existential rather than tactical. It is fundamental reorientation of values, where connection becomes more important than defended independence. Once this shift occurs, the avoidant can step up and lead without it threatening their sense of self, because their sense of self is no longer organized around not needing anyone. When they finally understand that passivity is choosing by not choosing. The ninth condition is when they finally understand that their passivity is not neutrality, it is choice. The avoidant often experiences their passivity as not choosing, as staying out of it, as not influencing outcomes. But passivity is itself a choice that has profound effects. By not initiating, they are choosing not to pursue connection. By not expressing feelings, they are choosing to keep others at distance. By not taking the lead, they are choosing to let relationships develop only as far as others are willing to push them. This understanding often comes through loss. The avoidant loses relationships because they would not take the lead, and in the aftermath, they recognize that their passivity was active choice to let those relationships die. Once the avoidant understands that passivity is choice, they can no longer use it as protective shield. They must either choose passivity, knowing it means choosing isolation, or choose to step up, knowing it means facing their fears. With this clarity, they can step up from place of conscious choice rather than reactive fear. When they are given clear framework for what stepping up actually looks like. The 10th condition is when they are given clear framework for what stepping up actually means in practical terms. The avoidant often struggles with vague requests to show up more because they genuinely do not know what these mean behaviorally. A clear framework might sound like, taking the lead means initiating plans to see me at least once a week. It means texting first sometimes. It means bringing up difficult conversations rather than avoiding them. It means expressing your feelings without me having to ask. These concrete behavioral descriptions give the avoidant roadmap for how to step up rather than leaving them guessing. When the avoidant has clear framework, they can make conscious decision about whether they are willing and able to do what stepping up requires. The clarity removes the paralysis that vagueness creates. This works best when the framework is provided without ultimatum energy that triggers their reactance. The message is invitation to step up rather than pressure that activates avoidant defenses. When they experience the relief that comes from finally being honest. The 11th condition is when they experience the profound relief that comes from finally being honest about their feelings instead of hiding them. The avoidant spends enormous energy managing their image, controlling what others see, hiding their vulnerability. This constant performance is exhausting, even if the avoidant does not consciously recognize the toll it takes. But sometimes the avoidant has a moment of genuine honesty, and instead of the catastrophe they feared, they experience relief. The other person does not use their honesty against them. The vulnerability creates deeper connection that feels good rather than threatening. This experience of relief can be powerful catalyst for the avoidant to continue being honest and to step up from that honest place. When the avoidant repeatedly experiences that honesty leads to relief rather than catastrophe, they begin to internalize new belief about whether vulnerability is safe. When someone models what healthy leading looks like without making them feel inadequate, the 12th condition is when they witness what healthy relational leadership looks like through someone modeling it without making the avoidant feel inadequate. Many avoidants grew up without models of healthy initiation or vulnerability. They learned defensive passivity as survival strategy, but never learned what secure attachment looks like in practice. When the avoidant is with someone who models healthy leadership, who initiates plans clearly, expresses feelings directly, creates intimacy through genuine vulnerability, the avoidant sees concrete example of what they could be doing. The crucial element is that the modeling happens without shaming the avoidant for not already knowing these things. The modeling becomes invitation rather than indictment. This gives the avoidant practical template for how to step up. They do not have to figure it out from scratch or guess at what healthy leadership looks like. When they realize their parents' relationship is not the only template, the 13th condition is when they recognize that their parents' relationship is not the only template for how relationships work. Many avoidants develop their patterns by observing dysfunctional relationship dynamics in childhood. The avoidant unconsciously carries these templates forward, assuming all relationships will follow the same patterns. They remain passive to avoid recreating the dynamics they witnessed. But when the avoidant encounters relationship that operates from entirely different template, when they experience intimacy that does not lead to control, closeness that does not feel suffocating, they begin to recognize their early templates are not universal truths. This recognition does not happen quickly, but with sustained exposure to different relationship dynamic. The avoidant can begin to update their internal models. When this recognition occurs, the avoidant becomes more willing to step up because they are no longer unconsciously protecting against their parents' dysfunction. When the relationship provides enough positive experiences to outweigh their fear. The 14th condition is when the relationship has provided enough positive experiences that the desire for more of those experiences becomes stronger than the fear of vulnerability. The avoidant has many negative associations with intimacy based on their history, but when they experience relationship that consistently creates positive feelings, these positive experiences begin to build their own gravitational pull. The accumulation matters. When positive experiences accumulate, the avoidant repeatedly feels good when with this person, repeatedly experiences relief when they share something vulnerable. The weight of these experiences begins to shift their overall orientation. This approach, rather than avoid motivation, is more sustainable foundation for stepping up. The avoidant who steps up because they genuinely want more of the positive experiences is operating from intrinsic motivation that can sustain their leadership over time. When they see their patterns repeating across multiple relationships. The 15th condition is when they finally see that their patterns repeat across every relationship, that the common factor in all their relational failures is them. This recognition is often painful and resisted for a long time. The avoidant typically explains each relationship's end as being about that specific person or circumstances, but eventually, if the avoidant has enough experience and self-awareness, they recognize the pattern. They see that in every relationship, they became distant when things got close. In every dynamic, they let the other person do all the work. In every connection, they sabotaged intimacy when it became real. This recognition forces them to confront that their passivity is pattern-based, not situation-dependent. When this recognition occurs, some avoidants finally become willing to step up because they understand that not stepping up means repeating the same pattern that has led to loneliness and loss every time. The pattern recognition creates urgency and motivation that external pressure never could. Why understanding these conditions matters for you. Understanding what finally makes an avoidant step up and take the lead matters because it helps you distinguish between conditions you can create or influence and conditions that must come from the avoidant's own internal evolution. Some of these conditions are within your power. You can genuinely leave if the relationship is not serving you. You can refuse to do all the emotional labor. You can maintain self-respect the avoidant admires. You can model healthy leadership. You can provide clear framework for what stepping up looks like. These are actions you can take that create environment where the avoidance stepping up becomes possible. Other conditions are entirely internal to the avoidant. Their therapeutic work, their recognition of patterns, their cost-benefit analysis shifting, their beliefs about relationships evolving, their pride in independence becoming less important than connection, their understanding that passivity is choice. You cannot create these conditions for them. You can be present and supportive if they do this work, but you cannot do the work for them or force them to do it. Understanding this distinction protects you from endless effort, trying to create changes that can only come from the avoidant's own choices and commitment to growth. The most important thing to understand is that even when all these conditions are present, the avoidant still must choose to step up. Conditions create possibility, but not certainty. The avoidant might have every reason to step up and still choose their patterns, because the patterns feel safer than change, because the fear is still too strong, because they are not ready to do the uncomfortable work that sustainable change requires. Your job is not to create perfect conditions that make stepping up inevitable. Your job is to make choices that serve your well-being, regardless of whether the avoidant steps up or not. If they do step up, you can evaluate whether their leadership is sustainable, whether it is backed by genuine growth work, whether recommitting to relationship serves you. You can observe whether they maintain their stepping up over time, or whether it is temporary response that fades when fear reactivates. If they do not step up, if they choose their patterns over the relationship, despite all these conditions being present, you have already chosen yourself. You have already established that you will not sacrifice your well-being for someone who cannot or will not meet you. You can continue forward without waiting for change that may never come, knowing that you gave the relationship every reasonable chance, and that their failure to step up is about them, not about your worth or your adequacy. The conditions that make an avoidant step up and take the lead are powerful when they are present, but they are not magic formulas that guarantee transformation. They are simply the circumstances under which transformation becomes possible if the avoidant chooses it. Your power lies not in controlling whether the avoidant steps up, but in controlling your own choices, whether to stay or go, whether to do all the work or require reciprocity, whether to accept less than you deserve or maintain standards that honor your worth. These are the choices that determine not whether the avoidant changes, but whether you protect yourself while giving the relationship every fair chance to become what it could be if both people were willing to show up for it.